Okay, then let me start. Hi, everyone. Again, my name is CJ. I'm going to be presenting this on behalf of myself and Li Mei Sung, and I'm going to be presenting today on the usage of as a discourse connective in Yami. And so this is, I think, one specific case that of what Jesus was just talking about, one of those and then constructions. So first, let me talk a little bit about discourse markers and discourse connectives. So discourse markers were defined by Schifrin as sequentially dependent elements which bracket units of talk. And units of talk, it's important to note that these were defined in relation to units of talk rather than a more structured unit like a sentence. And this reflects, of course, the nature of everyday speech as not being clearly structured around clearly defined sentences. And so discourse markers are often comprised of members from disparate word classes. These could be conjunctions or adverbs or even longer clauses and phrases. And so a subclass then of discourse markers are discourse connectives, which are coordinating conjunctions which perform various pragmatic and interactional functions. Schifrin gives the examples of and, but, and or in English as examples of discourse connectives. The meanings of all of these markers do interact with the discourse slots that they are in to produce new functions for the discourse. And the language I'm going to be looking at today is a language called Yami, also known as Dao. And Yami is a language belonging to the Austronesian language family. It's indigenous to the island called Orchid Island, which is just off the southeastern coast of Taiwan, right here. Now, Austronesian languages are split between what's called Formosan languages, which are a large group of primary branches of Austronesian, all confined to the island of Taiwan, and then Malayo-Polynesian languages, on the other hand, which is one single primary branch of Austronesian, including all Austronesian languages outside of Taiwan. And so Yami is notable for being the only Malayo-Polynesian language of Taiwan. It belongs to the Botanic group of Philippine languages, which we see right here in between Taiwan and Philippines. It's some very important typological characteristics of Yami are, first of all, it has a strong Philippine type voice system, which structures grammatical relations and transitivity in the language. It also has a dominant verb initial or predicate initial constituent order, although pronouns and modal or spectral particles can precede the verb. And it's also a mostly prepositional language. So today I'm going to be focused mainly on one marker in Yami in particular, and that is the marker is found in clause final or constituent final position. And so that means that it's one of the few postpositional markers of the language, which is mostly prepositional. So it's uttered with a rising intonation and also often followed by a pause. And so in Yami, there's actually another marker, and that is a clause initial marker. It's an adversative marker, it means but. And there's a possibility that final could actually derive from initial, but I'm not going to be discussing that today, just putting it out there. The final then, it's analyzed as a marker for fronting constructions. And so actually it's mostly known as a topic marker, which is used in topicalization constructions. It's also used when subordinate clauses are fronted to appear before the matrix clause. So let me give you some examples of both of these functions. Actually, I think I need to reshare because I don't think I shared the sound. Okay, I think I'm good now. So here are the examples. Like I said, has been previously mainly known as a topic marker in topicalization constructions. So here we have an example of topicalization. We have those three boys, they kept walking. And so the topic here is those three boys. It comes in sentence initial position before the verb, and then the comes after the topic. So let me play this audio for you. And then so for subordination, then the same thing. So we have this temporal adverbial clause in the evening that comes first before the matrix clause. Here's temporal subordinator, which marks it as a subordinate clause. And because this comes first, then we have that separates it from the matrix clause.
No magupam machit kuji jiawo ino.
So what is doing here then is marking the element on the left side as being given and presupposed, having a backgrounding function, then it also marks the element on the left side as being dependent on whatever's on the right side. So it marks that a relationship of dependency. Now, both of those example sentences actually came from a small corpus of spoken Yami discourse. And this corpus is mostly made up of narrative texts and with a total of 4 speakers. And actually, when we did a count of all the occurrences of in this corpus, we actually found that the uses of for marking fronted topics and fronted subordinate clauses actually don't even get up to 50%. So out of a total of 563 tokens, we actually only have 110 being used as a topic marker and 123, just marginally higher, being used for fronting of subordinate clauses. And so that means that we're left with a total 330 tokens of which is 58.6% of this some mysterious third category that is somehow different from topic marking and subordinating and that also means that clearly has a very important function in Yami discourse, which has been missed in previous descriptions and analyses. And probably that means that it was difficult to attain through elicitation methods. So what is this third category of then? So the difference, first of all, is structural. So what marks in this third category then are full independent clauses. And so like Jesus said, these are independent clauses which can be their own sentence. They're not marked as subordinate in any way. So that makes it different from the topic marking and subordinating usages of and because they're independent clauses, they can be their own sentence, they can't stand alone. Remember, topic marking topics are simple noun phrases, subordinate clauses are dependent on the matrix clause, so they cannot stand alone. And so also because we're connecting independent clauses here, there is no syntactic dependency that is established between the two clauses on either side of So here's an example of this usage of this third category. Here we have this one sentence which has 2 parts to it. So first of all, we have on the left, which is the owl left. And then on the right side, we have he climbed onto a big rock. These are joined together by and they're both, their own independent clauses. And let me play this audio for you.
Karwana no ye no tutora na yan. Kumalat no ye rakwa pao.
So because is uttered in the same way with that same rising intonation, and there's a pause, and also it has that same position at the end boundary of this clause, then we believe that this is just the same marker being used in a different way rather than being 2 separate markers. And so here, based on this sentence, then we can, based on the fact that it connects 2 independent clauses, we can tentatively say that here functions as a coordinating conjunction or a clause chaining device. And so this usage of has rarely been discussed before in the literature of Yami. And so my purpose here today then is to investigate the functions, the usage of as a coordinate conjunction in the discourse and see what discourse can tell us about the functions of this way. So let me look again at this exact same example sentence that we've already seen. So the owl left and then he climbed onto a big rock. So like we said before, these are independent clauses, but each of these clauses do contain only they contain single and separate events. And they're being presented one after the other, and that is the interpretation that we should have of it as well. So we should take this reading that one event happens after the other. So first of all, the owl leaves, and then he climbs onto a big rock. And so for the second example sentence, it's the same kind of thing that should happen. So first we have our friends heard, followed by and then they immediately told our teacher. And of course, our friends have to hear something first before they are able to tell the teacher whatever it is they heard. Same thing for this third sentence, in which we have, he was in the middle of the road. So the person finally reached the middle of the road, and then he caught sight of a little girl. So one event happens after the other. And so because all of these, they present the events side by side, and with that reading of happening one after the other, we can say that here has a sequential function. It has that pragmatic meaning of, it imparts that meaning of sequentiality onto the clauses that it joins together. And so when we're talking about sequentiality, that means that we also have to think about temporality in general. And actually, this usage of has been really, really briefly talked about before in the literature. It was actually classified as a type of temporal adverbial subordination. However, we believe that they are not really the same thing. And especially if you compare with the kind of temporal adverbial subordination that I had already presented before with that temporal subordinator, then they're not the same. Because we have to think about the use of subordinate clauses again as a backgrounding function with that given and presupposed nature. And so that means that this temporal adverbial clause will serve as a frame for the matrix clause event. So here in this example sentence, then we have whenever they were coming over, here it's marked with this temporal subordinator in new. So whenever they were coming over, that's a frame for the matrix clause event, which is it would very angrily peck at them. And so now for sequential, then it's not the same thing because neither clause is a frame. They're just presented plainly and the events happen separately and there's no subordinator here happening. So one just happens after the other. So here we have it suddenly appeared. So it first appears and they saw a big crab. So one happens first and then the other. So I definitely believe that there is a bit of a fuzzy boundary between these kinds of temporal expression, but I also think that they do express temporality quite a bit differently, so it should not really be considered the same kind of thing. However, we can't ignore that they're similar, and so the association of this kind of sequentiality with temporality then should give us a little bit of a hint as to maybe how the use of this particle to express sequential meanings actually came about in the first place. And I think that the answer could lie in some sort of a middle ground, which is these extremely frequent occurrences of very short conventionalized phrases with sequential meanings. And so these could be like after a while or later or and then. So here we've got a couple of examples. In this first example sentence, we have the marks this phrase munayam, and munay is a stative verb that means to take a long time. In this discourse context, however, it just means then. So we have something that happened in the discourse, and then one boy went to fetch it and called out to him. And then we have this second example sentence, same kind of thing. It's the word is karan, which just means later, but also in this discourse context, it just means then. So then I took the chicken that was still hanging. And so it's debatable whether or not to classify these really, really short phrases as adverbials or not, or verbal clauses, because there's no subordinator happening there. There's no temporal subordinator there. So you can't say that it's a subordinate clause, but it seems to function as such. It seems to function as an adverbial. And so I think that because these usages of these short phrases have been very, very frequent then, that might lead to an entrenchment of these usages and the meaning of sequentiality with itself. And so it leads to this association of with the sequential meaning, which might facilitate the rise of sequentiality as a pragmatic function of itself, than being able to just join clauses together without this kind of short conventionalized phrases. However, if we keep taking a deeper look into the data, then we actually, it was quite clear that there were other occurrences of which don't express any temporality whatsoever. So here are some examples of that. And here is the first sentence, which we have, there was a big tree, it bore a lot of fruit. Now, neither of these clauses are events. They are just descriptions of the states of affairs of the story at the time, and they are joined together by am still though. And so here in the second sentence, then we have something similar. We have, we won't fight with them anymore. We won't snatch their children anymore. And again, neither of these are events per se. They are promises made by the speaker. However, they are still joined together with this So it then what does here, then we can't say that it joins together clauses with this temporal sequential reading, but it joins the clauses together with some sort of looser connection then. And so it might make a little bit more sense then to say that this kind of usage of can be said to serve an additive function. And so what is this additive function then? So the additive function joins segments of discourse together, and it's used as a tool for the speaker to organize their thoughts into speech. So for uses of speaker planning, information packaging. And so then the use of then the utterance of here signals additional information to follow. So it means that the sentence is not really yet finished, and it indicates the speaker's intention of continuing. And so that means that this kind of usage of the additive usage of differs from sequential in terms of the kind of time that it uses to bind these clauses together. So with sequential then we can use Schifrin's concepts of event time and discourse time. So it's sequential then we can talk about event time. So event time indicates the temporal relationship between the propositions themselves, so that makes reference to the time of the event's discourse internally. And so that is something that sequential relies on to get that reading of temporal subsequence. And so on the other hand, then we have the use of as an additive function using discourse time. And so discourse time refers to the temporal relationship between utterances in a discourse, or rather the order in which the speaker presents utterances in a discourse. So this is more of a speaker-oriented thing. The speaker chooses to join clauses together with to form some sort of cohesive, coherent sequence that doesn't have a temporal reading, but they're connected in that way still too. So how do we get from grammatical usages of to more discourse usages of So we suggest that this pathway can have the following components to it. So first of all, through the use of as a marker of fronting construction, so topic marking and subordinating marking, it establishes a tight dependency between the elements on both sides of So remember that both of these things cannot stand alone. So there is dependency there. And so that means that it establishes an expectation of something to follow and so that carries over then once is expanded out of being marking topics and subordinate clauses to full clauses, to full independent clauses, that reading still carries and that expectation still carries over. And so that then combines with our second point, which is the affinity for these very short conventionalized clauses, and then which facilitates the rise then of the association of with that temporal sequential reading. And so once that
CJ, we need to finish. So
yeah, got it. And so once that association is there, then we can have that temporality bleached and exploited and loosened for the use of additive in discourse time rather than event time. So a loosening of that temporal association. And so to conclude then, we've also established that in Yami is not only a marker of topic and subordination fronting, but it's also a discourse connective of non-dependent clauses. And so with this usage, then there are two different discourse functions that we recognize. One is a sequential function, connecting clauses together with event time. The other is the additive function, which uses the discourse time then to join the clauses together. And with a possible pathway to development, this could potentially include the fact that there's a dependency that's marked, which leads to an expectation of continuation, the entrenchment of temporality, and then the bleaching of that temporality. And so lastly, we'd like to really quickly acknowledge the Ministry of Science and Technology from Taiwan for some fieldwork funding, and also a big thank you to the speakers of Yami who gave us their time, their linguistic knowledge, and their voices for our data. And thank you all for being here and listening.
Okay, thank you very much, CJ. Now the floor is open for questions. Let's see, we don't have anything in the Q&A. Okay. Yes, Tatiana, please.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, CJ. Very interesting talk. So I don't really have a question. Maybe it's more like a suggestion. So there is this notion of stage topics that is employed, for instance, in Artichoke Shear's work. I can give you a reference, like an exact reference later. But it might be useful to you probably to connect this developing into a connective from like a topicalization marker.
Could you, I remember briefly reading this like quite a while ago, so I don't really remember what stage topics are. Could you remind me?
Yeah, stage topics are cases when the topic of the sentence refers to the, well, to the place and time, to location and time of the event, basically. So
okay.
you have today, I don't know, John went to the store. So where you have clearly a dislocated, well, stage topic, a left dislocated stage topic, something like that.
Got it.
So it looks like some of your examples could be potentially, well, treated as stage topic, but not all. I think the use has extended, but it might have been some intermediate step that you could consider. So
actually, that's a very interesting point because there are quite a lot of these, but sometimes they're overtly marked as subordinate clauses. So you have like the temporal marker, and then like in the evening or in the morning or when whatever happens. But then sometimes in my data, then that subordinate marker isn't there anymore. So then it's just morning, whatever next. Or so I wonder if that's also like some sort of intermediate stage as well.
Yeah, this could be, I think, really greatly treated as stage topics. Just left.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Mira, you had a question?
Yes. So I don't know, you went very quickly, so I could be totally wrong, but you have an evolution of a temporal connective, and then you lose the temporal connective. How sure are you that you need this intermediate stage, given that from the limited my limited observation, you could derive the temporality either by inference, that's when you have blah, 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 and you know what happens first. And in the other case, you have later on, okay, which again could be responsible for the temporality. So do you have independent evidence that you have to evolve temporality and lose it actually?
No, I'm not super tied to this to this pathway, because I just noticed that because there were so many of those later on kind of very short phrases that I thought that it might be a factor. But actually, I mean, this was also, I think that recently I've been thinking, what if it's the other way around? What if actually we first have the discourse connection, just joining together clauses without that temporal reading, and then because these are narrative texts, so of course it's going to be used to present events one after the other, so then that could be the next stage. But I don't really have really strong evidence one way or the other, but I feel like that is another thing that I've been thinking about a lot recently, which I think, I don't know, might be also quite plausible.
I think it would make more sense, because why would a topicality and embedder become a temporal marker, right? It makes more sense for it to be bleached into a general connective. Okay, something is projected to come, something's relevant, that's relevant. But
right,
you look at the data.